Wow. We made it, guys. We've actually made it. I can't actually believe it, but this series, my favourite series on this channel, has made it to the 10th consecutive part. Well, I mean, I can believe it because I picked them, but still, 10. And after this particular episode is finished, there will be a complete list of the top 50 greatest forgotten horror movies of all time, and hopefully it will have highlighted some awesome horror movies that will be deserving of a second chance for us to take a look at. And I know I say this a lot, but I couldn't have done it without you guys, so thank you. As it goes for every other part, part 10 is for you. So let's see what else we've got lurking in our dusty treasure trove of horrors. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack Finches. Today, we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest forgotten horror movies, part 10. We made it, guys. Roll the clip. For the curious amongst you, that scene was from 2002's Death Watch, starring Jamie Bell and Andy Serkis in a terrifying hybrid of war horror and barbed wire, which for the astute amongst you managed to feature in part 9 of this series. And you know what, guys? I was so chuffed that quite a few of you remembered how awesome that movie was, and I guess that was proving the point of this series. So again, thank you. And also, it's a friendly reminder for those of you that haven't yet seen it that you probably should take a look in if you haven't yet had the chance. It's pretty great. Anyway, talking of pretty great, let's get on with the show. Kicking off at number 5, The Resurrected, 1991.
It was uncanny. It could have been a portrait of Charles himself.
What do you mean?
I mean, Kerwin looked exactly like Charles.
And what better way to celebrate part 10 of this series other than to highlight a forgotten gem from our other favourite facet of horror fiction, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. The truth is, I'm gonna level with you guys. Creative Commons and the statute of limitations of H.P. Lovecraft's works have not exactly been kind to the true mastery of some of his finer works. And because of that, since the late 70s through to pretty much now, some of the more prolific cinematic adaptations of Lovecraft's stories haven't exactly been great. Granted, I'm not including the works of Stuart Gordon or Brian Yuzna on that point, but it remains the same. Quality and Lovecraft adaptation don't exactly go hand in hand. However, there is one independent movie that quickly sank into the swamps of forgotten horror, and if you can get your hands on this movie, The Resurrected is certainly worth a look at. And also, I should probably preface this with the fact that The Resurrected is kind of difficult to acquire, although I'm pretty sure Scream Factory and a few other outlets have purchase options, so yeah, PSA declared. If you can get it, please get it. And also, it's probably important that we highlight the fact that Dan O'Bannon, as in the writer behind Alien, Total Recall, and many other awesome movies, was the director behind this movie in his second ever attempt at a feature film, his first being The Return of the Living Dead. Yeah, exactly. Dan O'Bannon is reason enough to check this movie out. Directed by O'Bannon and written by Brent Friedman, based upon Lovecraft's 1927 novella The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, The Resurrected stars Jane Sibbett and Chris Sarandon as Claire and Charles Ward respectively. And yes, that is Jane Sibbett as in Carol from Friends, and if you thought Ross Geller was an unabashed psychopath, then Charles Dexter Ward has got something to say about that. You see, Claire Ward hires a private investigator, John March, played by the awesome John Terry, to investigate the increasingly bizarre actions of her husband Charles. And while if you're familiar with the events of Lovecraft's story, then you'll know it makes for a pretty sublime descent into macabre horror madness. I'll say no more, this movie is a worthy adaptation. It paints a perfect portrait. By no means is it perfect, but it's certainly worth a look. Swinging in at number 4, The Hole, 2001.
No, Mike, listen.
Please stop torturing yourself, okay? Please. It's not important anymore, okay? It's not your fault.
I have to tell you something.
Coming in at number 4, Burnt Offerings, 1976.
This is hella nice.
And whilst we're on the topic of mysteries, we may as well throw this one onto the campfire, because this particular Burnt Offering, whilst not being anything new or ever groundbreaking in the field of horror cinema, is just a straight up good old fashioned horror movie with perhaps one of the most disturbing endings of many movies of its ilk. And by ilk, I mean haunted house horror, because that's exactly what this film is, and rips many pages out of the likes of 1963's The Haunting. That is probably one of the main reasons as to why this film got so slaughtered by critics, giving it the terrible reputation that it never quite recovered from. Why? I don't know, because this film is worth rediscovering for its cast alone. Oliver Reed and Bette Davis, who knock this film out of the park as the titans of cinema that they are. You see, the mid to late 70s were a time of shock and awe cinema, but Burnt Offerings is neither of those things. It's a slow burning, atmospheric crawl through a demonic old American mansion that's a little bit predictable in places, with perhaps too many deliberate ghosts in its closet. But the simplicity in its plot is the scaffolding for the most important consistent part of horror content. Fear. Because although dated, this film can still summon the creeps through every darkened keyhole and every wilted garden. Written and directed by Dan Curtis, based upon the 1973 novel of the same name by Robert Marasco, Burnt Offerings tells the tale of the Rolfe family who need a break from their cramped New York apartment and decide to take their summer holiday out in the coastal pleasures of Long Island. Of course, that's the worst possible decision, but we know that, not Oliver Reed and Betty Davis, which makes it all the more worthwhile when the old mansion gradually begins to feast on their flesh and blood, whilst a creepy old lady in the attic hides from the rest of the family. This film got a really bum deal by everyone else, but that doesn't mean that its horror credentials were for nothing. Give it a watch.
Coming in at number 3, The Burning, 1981.
Eddie!
What?
How come Karen left early?
Hey, look, it's like Michelle said, okay? She was upset about something, all right?
Released in 1981 and directed by Tony Maylam, The Burning is a slasher that tells of a summer camp caretaker named Cropsey who was horribly burnt from a prank gone wrong. Years later, after being released with severe disfigurements, he seeks to target those responsible at a nearby summer camp. Now, the film itself is based on the New York urban legend of Cropsey, a boogeyman-like figure with a hook for a hand, lurking in the woods seeking out his next victim. And this is what goes down in The Burning, which took place 3 years before Freddy invaded our screens and dreams. This was a movie which gave us our first deep-fried psycho of the slasher era. Now, this movie was produced by he who must not be named, Harvey Weinstein, and follows the aforementioned groundskeeper who was out for revenge and armed with a pair of humongous pinking shears, making an unannounced return to camp, ready to make not just heads, but all limbs roll. And to top it off, the legendary Tom Savini was the man behind the gore effects, which should be incentive enough to check out this movie. However, if that's not enough, the movie also features a ton of actors before they became big stars, such as Fisher Stevens, Jason Alexander, and Holly Hunter. Queen.
Next up at number 2 we have Eden Lake. If this list has taught us anything thus far, it's that the 2000s were filled to the brim with some of the greatest underrated horror movies of our time. Eden Lake was one of the greatest. Released in 2008, this British horror stars Kelly Riley and Michael Fassbender, as well as a very young Jack O'Connell. The plot concerns Jenny, a teacher, and her boyfriend Steve, who head to a lake to spend a peaceful weekend. However, a group of undisciplined teenagers irk them with their continuous pranks, ruining their weekend. And it is far more than childish pranks, with the weekend becoming a fight to survive for everyone involved. Now, the film itself is among a group of roughly contemporaneous films that deal with concerns over broken Britain and fears of hoodies. Now, for those not from the UK, broken Britain refers to a perceived widespread state of social decay in the UK, with hoodies being at the forefront and also referred to as chavs. Lawless individuals have no respect for society. But back to the film. After the couple confront the gang of unruly teens, their weekend descends into madness, as conversation escalates with the teens quickly revealing themselves to be a sadistic force of violence. We hate to see it. Thankfully, the movie cleverly avoids the classist bent that threatens at every turn, instead focusing on the pressures and dangers of groupthink. Eden Lake was met with mostly positive reviews, with Rotten Tomatoes giving it 79%, with the general consensus reading, a brutal and effective British hoodie horror that, despite the cliches, stays on the right side of scary. The movie, particularly if you're from Britain, is a truly harrowing experience, with many having their own stories of hooded thugs. It is a chilling experience that will linger in the pit of your stomach for days, even months.
Finally, at number 1, we've got Alien Raiders. 2008 doesn't seem that long ago, but all of a sudden that's 12 years gone by. It makes sense this one's sort of under the radar, especially considering the low budget and lack of wide release. This was pre-streaming too, so it's likely they didn't reach the audience that they wanted to. The boilerplate title probably didn't help either. Regardless, Alien Raiders is a crazy tense bottle scenario of a movie. A group of masked gunmen take a grocery store hostage in order to check the shoppers for alien infection, while the cops outside have no idea what's going on. It kicks off fast with very little setup or explanation, which is actually a very good thing in this case. The alien hunting squad rolls in and scares the hell out of folks in the store. No time to explain, drink this milk. It's so effective because they're acting extremely unhinged for no apparent reason. Folks in the store haven't the foggiest as to why they're being held hostage, and you see folks getting gunned down for being aliens? Picture yourself in that situation, you're out buying focaccia bread or something, and all of a sudden people storm this store. You're sitting there, hands tied behind your back, watching people get shot for no reason. They're saying aliens did it? These people are crazy. As the alien threat becomes more apparent, the clock starts ticking while the cops outside get more and more antsy. It's tense and well shot, and at times even feels a little bit like a modernized The Thing. There's less cool effects, and obviously Carpenter wasn't involved, but the comparison is still effective. We've got a group of desperate, mostly competent people fighting against a threat they barely understand in a tight space. It works. Do you think you'll remember these now? Go give them a watch and let me know if they stick. What'd you think of the list? How many of these have you seen? Do you remember them, or was this a shocking reminder? Are there any sci-fi horrors that I neglected to mention? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more bespectacled ones from the top 5 scary living creatures that need to be in horror movies. The Art of Horror says, not living, but I've always wanted to see a marsupial tree lion in a movie. Those things look evil AF. Stealthy, carnivorous, tree-dwelling death dealers. Oh hell yeah. Let's find some fossils and pull a Jurassic Park. I want to see it happen. Victor Valdez says, I'm picturing the satanic gecko with a larger urban counterpart. Imagine that stalking the streets of, say, Rio, but then it hops a cargo container to NYC, shades of SCP-1155, predatory street art. Now let's imagine enough for a breeding colony. That's monster movie gold. I don't know what you're doing writing in the comments here. Get out the old typewriter and put together a first draft. Pitch that to a studio ASAP. Tammy Ruiz says, love the irony of wearing an outdoors shirt while in quarantine. I'm trying to manifest the outdoors inside. Flanker VT says, good job on being able to concentrate and work from home. I mean, it's not the easiest thing, but we gotta get the content to you good folks at home. And Fundy Gymnast says, I actually volunteered in my animal physiology class to let my prof slap a lamprey onto me like a 90s slap bracelet. That's an image I didn't think I needed, but here we are. One question for you though, why? And that's all the time we have for today. Before I emulate Peggy Hill while skydiving, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more science fiction freakiness. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Shoehorn expressive. Why can't I speak today? Everything sucks. Today, we're gonna be counting down the top 5 scary forgotten horror. Before we get going, make sure, whoop, it helps get the titular Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum. Hi-yi-yi-yi-yi-yi-yi. Yeah, this one opened a couple weeks ahead of the Jeff Goldblum, what am I saying? From here we enter a world of deceit and even as, and when I say brutal, I mean remakes catch a lot of flack, don't you think? Usually they're compared to whatever flick they're based on, resulting in some lost love. But what about the ones that get lost entirely? There are remakes of horror classics that seem to have evaporated entirely, never referenced, recommended, or reviled. So let's have a look at some of these hard to remember redos. It's time to count down the top 5 forgotten horror movie remakes. Right on, let's get to it. Coming in at number 5, we've got Piranha from 1995. The Piranha most people are familiar with these days is probably the 2010 3D schlockfest erected by Alexander Aja. Boasting a cast containing Adam Scott, Jerry O'Connell, Christopher Lloyd, Ving Rhames, and more, there was plenty of name recognition to be had. The insane amount of fun made it easy to remember too. But before there was Piranha 3D, there was plain old regular Piranha, made for TV. A remake of the 1978 classic put together by Joe Dante. That's right, Piranha 1995, and boy does this one get lost in the mix. When it comes to claims to fame, this version of the Killer Fish movie has very little. Mila Kunis is in it. That's right, in her debut role too, at age 12 as the daughter of intrepid homeowner Paul Grogan. Beyond that, I'm really not sure what there is to say about this version of Piranha. The screenplay is almost identical to the original with very little room to update for a modern audience. In fact, even the special effects were recycled from the 1978 version. That is some next level remake streamlining, eh? Most folks agree that although the two films are technically the same, all the humor seems to have been sapped from the 1995 version, making it much more of a slog to sit through. This probably has something to do with the fact that nobody remembers this movie. I suppose when you're on a made-for-TV budget trying to breathe some life into a 20-year-old movie, you're gonna have to make some concessions. At least they got it done, right? Really and truly, you're better off watching any of the other Piranha movies, even 3DD. That's right, this movie somehow manages to be less entertaining than 3DD. So unless you're a Mila Kunis completionist, and I'm sure some of you are, you should probably leave this remake in the forgotten pile, just to be safe.
You know what? I was pretty damn adventurous as a kid, but then I saw The Hole and I thought twice about poking my head around abandoned underground bunkers. I'm just kidding, you can't keep a good spelunker down, but still, this movie is certainly food for thought when it comes to making consequential decisions as a young adult. It's also absolutely crazy that this movie was made nearly 20 years ago. That's 2 decades. But also, it's quite enlightening to know that 2001's The Hole was certainly a demonstration of capturing a time and a place, and I think that's exactly why this movie is so appealing in hindsight. This movie is so 90s/early 2000s that it hurts, and it exemplifies a period of British horror where the new millennium had made way for a much more transatlantic kind of horror. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but please know that this movie is dripping with more angst than a Hawthorne Heights record that just made pen pals with a bootleg Dirt and Grey poster on a live journal thread. Yeah, exactly. Directed by Nick Ham and written by Ben Court and Caroline Ip, The Hole is based upon the 1991 psychological horror by Guy Burr. It tells the tale of 4 well-off preparatory students, Liz, Frankie, Mike and Jeff, who after spending a weekend partying in an underground bunker, as you do, find themselves locked inside with no way out. And oh yeah, did I mention that it stars the awesome Thora Birch and Keira Knightley respectively, who throughout this movie are both absolutely brilliant alongside Desmond Harrington and Lawrence Fox as the 2 convincingly decadent male blackguards Mike and Jeff. This movie is awesome and it's reminiscent of some of the more shocking psychological thrillers that flew under the radar during the mid to late 90s, but more importantly it made that style palatable for an emerging horror audience. Really, if this movie flew past you, I'd certainly give it a second look. Yeah, the plot is a little obvious, but it's not about that, it's about performance. And again, Thora Birch is remarkable in this movie. Also, it has a supporting role by Embeth Davitt, aka Miss Honey from Matilda, and all is good in the world, so give it a watch just for that, really. Next up at number 3, Stir of Echoes, 1999.
What the hell was that?
Kevin Bacon, my man. And truth be told, this film might not be as truly great as it is without Mr. Bacon giving one of his most convincing performances to date, which is also equally crazy that for the most part, 1999's Stir of Echoes is completely overlooked when it comes to contemporary horror. But just like another film that is on this list, it may have to do with a particular syndrome of the late 90s, where a chain of some of the most iconic movies of the last millennium were released in a quick succession before this one, being The Sixth Sense, The Blair Witch Project and The Mummy. Yeah, that's some tough competition. And sadly, that was one of the prime reasons as to why Stir of Echoes got shuffled to the back of the pile. But fear not, because that's why we're here. Written and directed by David Koepp, the man responsible for writing the screenplay for Jurassic Park, Stir of Echoes is loosely based upon the 1958 novel of the same name by Richard Matheson, the man also responsible for penning 1954's I Am Legend. Yeah, and as you may already tell, this film's got quite the pedigree behind it. It tells the tale of a man named Tom Witzke, played by Bacon, alongside his wife Maggie and his son Jake, who supposedly possesses the supernatural ability to communicate with the dead. Although Tom is a skeptic of his son's powers, the rest of his family aren't, and so one evening during a party, he jokingly agrees to be hypnotized by Maggie's sister, a true believer of the spirit world. And then, just like that, the echoes within his mind are stirred, and Tom tumbles down a rabbit hole of supernatural intrigue and the callings of a disturbed spirit and her grisly murder. I won't say any more because, like any good horror mystery, the best experience comes with pulling at the thread for yourself. But this film is surprisingly fantastic and well worth a watch.
Coming in at number 2, Hell High, 1989.
Did you have some trouble with those punk kids today?
I can take care of myself, thank you.
Directed by Douglas Grossman back in 1989, Hell High is a slasher that centers on a school teacher who suffers a mental breakdown after being harassed and attacked by a group of teenagers. Now, during the attack, the teacher accidentally kills 2 of the teens that attacked her. Bad news bears. Now, upon release, the film didn't receive the greatest of reviews, which is understandable after hearing the plot. But this film is fun and deserves a little more respect. By the end of the 80s, the slasher subgenre was already on its last leg, so it was no surprise when this indie horror came out of nowhere and again didn't receive a whole lot of love. Not only is it fun, but it also has more twists and turns than an English countryside road. Only Brits will understand that. Anyway, the film is formulaic, yes, but it has enough intrigue for you to easily forget about it. Without giving too much away, the victims in the movie and victimizers aren't exactly who or what they seem. And just when you think you've got it all figured out, enter another twist and yet another turn. The film honestly deserves more respect, as does indie director director Douglas Grossman. At the time, it seemed the slasher formula had outrun its course. However, Hell High certainly had other ideas, injecting vitality into the subgenre just when it mattered most. Honestly, check it out. It is a hidden gem in the horror genre. Trust. Now, I know not everyone agrees with me, with Richard Harrington from the Washington Post stating, I quote, "Even within the limited expectations of the horror genre, it's not particularly satisfying, since the chills are on the cheap. However, sitting through Hell High is likely to bring back at least one high school memory, that of a long detention, made worse because you have to pay for it." Savage, Richard. Savage. To that, I say, bah humbug.
And last on our list, we have Triangle. From writer-director Christopher Smith, who put a delightfully cheeky spin on the backward slasher genre with Severance, he got even more creative with the 2009 movie Triangle. This psychological horror stars Melissa George and a young Liam Hemsworth, and centers on George's character who portrays a single mother who goes on a boating trip with several friends. However, when they are forced to abandon their ship in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, they board a derelict ocean liner where they become convinced that someone is stalking them. Now, George's character Jess is a woman with an undisclosed source of agony behind her surface-level calm, with plenty being revealed throughout the duration of the movie. Now, it's tough to even discuss the film without giving away its twists and turns, which are superbly executed throughout. However, what I can say is that a vicious time loop thrusts the group into a nightmare scenario, with Jess emerging at a pivotal time that may be the key to their escape. Now, overlapping timelines is incredibly difficult to execute. However, Christopher Smith does this with grace, displaying the horrors of being trapped in one hellish loop. The film was received well by critics and viewers alike, with the movie garnering an approval rating of 80%, with the general consensus reading, "Triangle sails into some strange waters, but this intelligent, well-acted horror outing anchors its idiosyncrasies in a satisfying, scary story." Honestly, this film has stayed with me for many years, with it being one horror that isn't easy to forget, for many reasons. Particular scenes linger in the mind, however, it's its unique delivery that will make you want to return time and time again. Well, there we have it. Do you guys agree with our list? Were there any forgotten horror movies from the 2000s that we missed? What decade would you like us to cover next? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below, and perhaps we can do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos. Top 5 scary forgotten horror movies from the 2010s part 2. Joey for Track said, "The Woman is great. Lucky McKee is such a unique and underrated director. His 2002 film May is classic, and his most recent film Kindred Spirits is one of his best. Sad to see no one talking about it. May and Kindred Spirits are free on Tubi. Go watch." Good to know. I don't know what Tubi or Tubby is, but I'll find them on another site. But I'll definitely check them out because I have not seen them. Vinny NG said, "Seeing Lucy and that bright as a heck background is something I can never get used to, and that smile. Honestly, I can't get used to that background either, and seeing myself smile, it unsettles me." Sonia Labrandi said, "Love it when Lucy is our host, she is amazing." Well, thank you, Sonia. Much love. Seal Brad said, "You know the Queen is just chilling in a robe and slippers reading this. Look, I'm not in a robe. I'm in a hoodie and slippers, okay? Yes, I'm wearing slippers." And on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later. As you can tell, I am not filming at the studio anymore. I'm recording this from home because, as most will know, and if you don't, Ontario has announced a non-essential business shutdown, which means we are keeping things going, but we are doing it from home. Our studio is closed, but we will not stop producing videos for you guys because we love it. This is our passion, and we do it for you guys. So we will keep making videos, but we will be self-isolating. Social distancing for the win. It is safe to say that the 2010s was one of the greatest decades for horror cinema, with the likes of Get Out, It Follows, Hereditary, The Cabin in the Woods, and The Conjuring gracing our screens. However, there were a ton of terrifying horrors that were overshadowed by the aforementioned heavy hitters. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 5 scary forgotten horror movies from the 2010s. Before we begin though, be sure to stick around until the end of the video where I'll be responding to some of your comments. And with that, let's jump in. Coming in at number 5, we have The Invitation, 2015. The Invitation is a 2015 horror thriller film directed by Karen Kusama and stars Logan Marshall Green, Tammy Blanchard, and Michael Huisman. from The Haunting of Hill House. Responding to an invitation from his ex-wife, a man brings his girlfriend to a dinner party. There, he relives the trauma of their child's death and becomes suspicious that his ex-wife has ulterior motives for inviting him. The invitation is an insidiously subtle nightmare in which you are constantly going back and forth in your head. Is there something wrong at this party? Or is there something wrong with me? The movie manages to torture our minds from start to finish with its constant sense of unease and uncomfortable social interactions. The Invitation holds an 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critical consensus reading, The Invitation makes brilliant use of its tension-rich premise to deliver a uniquely effective and surprisingly clever, slow-building thriller. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you get invited to a dinner party, just say no. Lucky for us, we're all self-isolating. Social distance.
Arriving at number 4, we've got The Arrival. This movie is exactly as many years old as me and has nothing to do with Denis Villeneuve's language-based meditation on motherhood. The Arrival is indeed a first contact alien movie, but it takes a much sillier approach and stars none other than a very sweaty Charlie Sheen. I wonder what he has to say about all the tiger blood related news headlining Netflix these days. Returning to the topic at hand, The Arrival has a whole lot go right for it, even though it can be pretty cheesy at times. It's the classic 90s sci-fi thriller, complete with a wisecracking little kid and some questionable cultural costuming. It's likely that the main reason this one isn't as well remembered as it could be is that it was up against Independence Day during its theatrical run. Yeah, this one opened a couple weeks ahead of Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum's Doomsday Disaster piece, which seems to have all but erased it from our collective consciousness. The Arrival has Sheen play a radio astronomer who comes across a signal from another world. This, for whatever reason, leads him to being immediately canned and searching for signals out of his attic. While continuing his search from the comfort of home, he stumbles across some real top secret stuff and has a great deal of difficulty convincing anyone of anything. It's the classic man who knew too much story. From here, we enter a world of deceit, and the movie gets both intense and goofy. For every scene where our hero narrowly escapes death by some wild assassination attempt, there is also one where Charlie Sheen dresses up as a Mexican security guard or has black hole grenades lobbed at him in his possessions. Even if they do look kind of funky, the aliens with backward legs are an image I can't seem to get out of my head. Inverse knees, man. In the end, The Arrival is also sort of a commentary on global warming, which is a caveat I wasn't expecting. But truly, what is scarier than the world heating up to unlivable temperatures so that an alien race can comfortably take over? Well, maybe that scenario, but without the aliens, because then it would be for nothing. Coming in at number 3, we've got April Fool's Day from 2008. See, if they were gonna make a remake of an April Fool's themed horror movie, why not resurrect Slaughter High? Too little too late, I suppose. Although everything will be remade eventually, because how else are studios gonna hold on to the rights of everything until the end of time? But I digress. This version of April Fool's Day is based on the 1986 flick of the same name. However, unlike the original, this one was destined for the small screen. Not even made for TV like Piranha. AFD 2008 was straight to video. You know what that means. Very few redeeming features. They tried to make something that star Scout Taylor Compton describes as Mean Girls crossed with horror, and those are lofty aspirations. Although if someone did it right, it could be a lot of fun. It's too bad they couldn't capitalize on that idea in 2008. It ended up feeling a lot more like an I Know What You Did Last Summer ripoff than an April Fool's one. And the comedy we were promised, well, it wasn't very funny, even in 2008. And the bar was not set very high at that point. It's not too surprising that this one went right to the bargain bins and then straight out of our collective memory. Maybe it's worth picking up on April Fool's Day, but don't expect to do much other than crack jokes.
Coming in at number 2, Ghost Story, 1981.
We can feel things watching us, and following us. And we dismiss them as fantasies.
Tell me guys, how is it that a worthy cinematic adaptation of one of the greatest works of horror fiction from the 20th century manages to find itself falling down the back of the dusty old shelf without a second looking? Beats me. But you know what's worse? This film has got 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. How? I do not know, and yet whilst this movie is far from being perfect, I think it's down to us individuals to be the judge of Ghost Story's true horror merits. For those of you that are already aware of Peter Straub's colossal horror novel of the same name, you'll know that it's one of the finest demonstrations of how to spin a classic ghostly tale, and whilst that particular horror trope is often overworked and underpaid, if you're looking for a familiar ghost story of the cinematic variety, then this movie is exactly that. I'm still scratching my head as to how this film became so poorly received, and yes, I do understand the criticisms of it, and I don't think that they're too far from being wrong. Ghost Story is indeed slow. It is drawn out, it irks on being rambling at points, but my word, if this film isn't the demonstration of creeping dread in a candlelit room flickering with the shadows of a haunted past, I'm not sure what else would suffice. And also, this movie is a different kind of forgotten cautionary tale that could certainly use a look in this day and age. Oh, also, did I mention that this movie stars frickin' Fred Astaire? Yeah. Exactly. Directed by John Irvin and written by Lawrence D. Cohen, Ghost Story is set during the frigid winter of 1979 in the small New England town of Milburn, where four elderly friends, the businessman Ricky Hawthorne, the lawyer Sears James, Dr. John Jaffrey, and the mayor Edward Charles Wanderley, convene for their weekly gathering. They are members of the Chowder Society, an informal men's club that gets together each week to tell tales of horror whilst they sip cognac for the sheer joy of it. I'll say no more because this film needs its slow creep of a narrative to get going, but as I said, this movie is all about performance. Fred Astaire, Melvin Douglas, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and John Houseman undoubtedly carry this film as the hallmarks of cinema that they are, and Alice Krige is also remarkable in this movie, but part and parcel of Ghost Story depends on which way you view the resolution of its closing scenes. There is a real sense of something remarkable in this film that I can't quite place, but it's worth finding that out for yourself. You see, it was said that during the filming for Ghost Story, Fred Astaire felt that he was going to die or be murdered, so much so that he considered dropping out of the production. Ghost Stories, they really can get to you. And finally, coming in at our number one spot, Next of Kin, 1982. And if we're talking about horror credentials, holy moly is this film the true definition of an underrated masterpiece. And it's perhaps one of the most fitting entries on this top 5 list series because 1982's Next of Kin is so damn good that every horror fan needs to take a look at it just to realise exactly what they were missing. But let's have a brief history lesson first and talk about one of the most intriguing subgenres in cinema, Ozploitation. In Australia, before the period that ran between the early 70s and the late 80s, film culture wasn't exactly the most open and free that it could have been, and expression in film in particular was stemmed by the Australian government, banning pretty much every movie that wouldn't meet their strict censorship standards in a post-World War II society. But then came the new wave and some of the most batshit crazy horror movies in cinema were born, which is a matter for a whole other video, but the point is the culmination of all of those things that were learned throughout the Ozploitation era peaked at 1982's Next of Kin. Written and directed by the awesome Tony Williams and starring Jackie Kerrin and John Jarrett, as in, yes, that John Jarrett, the guy that plays the terrifying Mick Taylor in Wolf Creek. Next of Kin is pretty much The Shining meets Psycho with a little pinch of 1980's The Changeling thrown into it. Now I won't say anything about the plot because there are too many twists and turns in this movie that half the joy of watching it comes with the breathlessness in those sporadic moments where the dial gets turned up to 11. This film is as Australian as it gets, and the final act of this film is even more Australian than that. The cast is fantastic, it's beautifully and vividly shot, it's genuinely terrifying for the most part, and it is one of the most entertaining horror movies ever to come out of Australia. It's a shame that it's often widely forgotten, but give it a watch, you won't be disappointed. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 scariest forgotten horror movies, part 3. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let us know your thoughts, as well as any of your own choice picks down in the comment section below. Before we depart from today's video, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. Lee Cole says, new Audible credit and a recommendation from Jack. My endless acquisition of the Horus Heresy is put on pause this month. Well, everyone needs a break every once in a while, Lee, but jokes aside, if you haven't already read the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, then definitely use your Audible credit on that. Logan Ninefingers is one of the most awesome and underrated characters of all time, and don't even get me started on the bloody 9. On that recommendation, unfortunately that's all I've got time for in today's video. Cheers, stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host Jack Finch, you've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.
By now, I am a slasher fanatic and take pride in the fact that I have seen almost all of them. Well, just about. Saying that, some of my favourites, specifically ones hailing from the 80s, have been long forgotten, and in my opinion that should be a criminal offence. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 5 scariest forgotten slasher films. Before we begin though, be sure to stick around until the end of the video where I'll be responding to some of your comments, and with that, let's jump in. Coming in at number 5, The House on the Edge of the Park, 1980. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, House on the Edge of the Park is an English-language Italian exploitation horror starring David A. Hess and Giovanni Lombardo as two criminals who infiltrate a posh gathering in a villa and violently turn against the partygoers after they mock them. Now, this movie is a loose remake of Last House on the Left, in which Hess also starred. Now, the director's name may sound familiar, and that's because he was the man behind the highly controversial Cannibal Holocaust. Now, the movie is part home invasion, part rape revenge, and part sleazeball sex thriller. Yeah, I know, it's a lot of a lot. It is a movie that pulls absolutely no punches with its gore and graphic scenes that depict sexual torture and razor blade slashings. It is truly disturbing, but is a forgotten slasher that deserves your attention simply because it's a masterpiece of debauchery and has perhaps one of the best twist endings of all time, which says a lot. However, for the faint-hearted, I would say be warned, because this film has moments that I spit on your grave would quake in fear at, and is pretty much the outcome of meshing Funny Games, Last House on the Left, and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer together. Again, that's a lot of a lot.
Coming in at number 4, one of my personal favourites, Trick or Treat. Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat is perhaps the finest ode to Halloween ever created, and that's saying something. Released in 2007, this anthology film relates 4 Halloween horror stories with a common element in them. Sam, a mysterious child trick-or-treater wearing shabby orange footy pajamas with a burlap sack over his head. He is absolutely terrifying, trust me. The character in turn makes an appearance in each of the stories whenever a character breaks Halloween tradition. In this chilling horror, the residents of a small town are not quite what they seem. The local principal is a child-murdering sociopath, and the nubile virgin a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, what makes this movie so effective is Michael Dougherty's obvious love and respect for the horror genre, tradition, holiday lore, and superstition. Without naming any names or dragging any previous horrors about Halloween, Trick or Treat is quite simply the quintessential Halloween film. Now, the film currently holds an approval rating of 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading a deftly crafted tribute to Halloween legends. Trick or Treat hits all the genre marks with gusto and old-fashioned suspense. Honestly, if you want to gear up for Halloween 2020, considering we're all in quarantine, we don't have anything else to do, I suggest you check out this holiday classic now. Coming in at number 3, we have Maniac 2013. Maniac is a 2013 slasher film directed by Frank Calhoun and starring Elijah Wood and Noor Arnizada. It is a remake of the 1980 film of the same name and follows the violent exploits of a brutal serial killer. The movie is completely faithful to William Lustig's controversial film, while simultaneously doubling down on violence and delivering a pulverizing slasher. Maniac is a solid revival of a genre that was beginning to feel rather stale. Not to mention, with its throwback synthesizer score and shadowy lighting, the entire movie evokes a sense of dread from start to finish. Now, the movie polarized critics, with it receiving a 53% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus reading shocking and bloody. Maniac is smarter than your average psychological slasher, but it's often undermined by its excessive gore. Now, some audience members had quite the visceral reaction when viewing the movie for the first time. Calhoun said that audience members have vomited and even fainted, and he took the reaction as a compliment, explaining, "We had a screening here in Los Angeles and somebody passed out, which I pat myself on the back for. The movie had to creep on you. It's a different kind of fear. It's more of a nauseating fear. You really have the opportunity to maybe feel the nausea of committing crime rather than glorifying it just for the aspect of fun and thrill. The audience gets to experience for the first time how sick it is to commit a murder. We're certainly not condoning it, but making a real statement about serial killers."
Coming in at number 2, we've got Cube. Oh, Canada. I'm always shouting out Canadian origins, you know me. Cube is a cult classic that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Members of its ravenous fanbase may claim otherwise, but that's because they never stop talking about it. Plus, there's plenty of new stuff that tries and fails to take its place by using similar tropes, but way less effectively. I'm looking at you, Escape Room, and the soon-to-be-released Escape Room 2. There's 7 folks trapped in a cube, each of whom have a talent that should help them survive the brutal gauntlet ahead. And when I say brutal, I mean both in terms of bloody traps set and the architecture of the rooms. Cube is famous for being atmospheric, intelligent, and not trying to force an explanation down the throat of everyone watching. It feels a little Kafka-esque and definitely has some surreal charm. Plus, it's an absolute masterwork in low-budget thrills. Like, they just redecorate and relight the same concrete room in a bunch of different ways to make it seem like the cube is as big as it claims to be. Big budgets be damned, this looks and feels more cohesive than most of what the other torture porn flicks try to get across. I think the best thing that Cube does is avoid overwritten explanations and exposition. There are moments in which characters pontificate upon the purpose and origin of the cube, ranging from government conspiracies to alien life forms, but they don't ever try to give a big, overarching reveal. No, it focuses on the characters dealing with problems as they present themselves and interacting with each other in interesting ways. And crazy traps. Gotta love the crazy traps. All for our enjoyment. It's kind of meta when you think about it. Who needs government experiments and extraterrestrials when you have a bloodthirsty audience? And coming in at number 1, we've got The Uninvited from 2009. This one might not read as a remake at first. And it's not a remake of the 1944 supernatural horror. It's actually a remake of the 2003 South Korean film A Tale of Two Sisters, which is an adaptation of a Korean folktale. Lots to look at here. But back to The Uninvited, this is a pretty decent little adaptation. There have definitely been worse American remakes of Asian movies. Much worse. So why was this one sort of forgotten? Well, I think the different titles had something to do with it, and the fact that it was a remake of a relatively recent movie at the time from another country. That could have had something to do with its little renown. And of course, why watch a remake like this when you can watch the original? But hey, Elizabeth Banks and Emily Browning serve up some quality performances, and the twist is changed up enough that you can still get some enjoyment going in knowing that the two sisters aren't exactly what they seem. The Uninvited manages to eke out a little ground for itself and finds a semi-unique identity in doing so. So it might not have turned too many heads at the time of release, but it still holds up as a decent little horror flick, remake or not. So, do you remember any of these? Sometimes it's hard, especially with so many movies out there. Plus, there are all the movies that are essentially unsanctioned remakes. You know the ones. What's the movie remake you wish people talked about more? And what about the one you wish never got made? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more inane ones from the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020 Part 6. Isaiah Hatt says, I'm positive my dad is an SCP because I can never seem to find him. Womp womp. Sir Slash says, as the author of SCP-5927, I really want to compliment you on explaining it so well in that amount of words. Definitely made that one a little complex. And for the island name, I just threw something together and can't even speak that one out myself. And as the host of Top 5 Scary, I want to compliment your sci-fi writing skills. You've got a knack for cool details. Taya001 says, hard to imagine anyone wanting to be in the universe of the SCP Foundation. You'd probably see a whole lot of cool stuff. You just have to be ready to die at a moment's notice. And Sinister Sadie says, how do I find this Uncle Charlie? Asking for a friend. You don't find him, he finds you. Keep your eyes open. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go eat an apple suspiciously shaped like a skull. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go eat a no. I feel like I'm just like talking like a fool today. I feel like I don't sound like a human being. It's very strange. And that's all the time we have for today. Woof. Aja? Aha. Oh no. I'm just gonna say it both ways. The Piranha people, when it comes to claims to fame, this version that is some next level I suppose when you're on a made-for-TV budget trying to breathe some life into a 20-year-old movie, you're gonna have to make woo. I suppose when you're really and truly, you're better watching. This is by no means a bad movie, but it exists in a space where it's less good than the This is by no means a bad movie. It exists in a space where it's less good than the nope. I don't know what's happening. My brain doesn't work. I already mentioned the flesh cookies, so here's a few more holiday horrors that you'll get to see. I don't know what I'm doing today. I'm just not reading words. It ended up feeling a lot more like I Know What You Did Last Summer, but ripped off. Nope. It ended up feeling a lot more like an Maybe it's worth picking up on April Fool's Day, but don't expect too much with plenty of ooey gooey.
The thing is with horror cinema, sometimes there's just so much good stuff zipping through those terror-fueled airwaves that more often than not it's incredibly easy to miss all kinds of long-forgotten classics that would otherwise have enriched your life of horror fandom in more ways than you could ever have expected. And yeah, whilst that may be laying it on a little thick, it's also important to note that this is our third resounding attempt at scouring through the dusty shelves of horror cinema to find some of the greatest films that never truly received the recognition they deserved. Or on the flip side, were just straight up forgotten. Hey, it's a trying task, but someone's got to do it, right? Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, top 5 scary videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch, as today we curiously take a look at the top 5 scariest forgotten horror movies, part 3. Roll the clip.
What is your name?
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from 1980's The Changeling, not to be confused with the similarly named period piece starring Angelina Jolie, because Peter Medak's resounding psychological thriller is one of the greatest underappreciated and long forgotten horror films of the 20th century. Really, it's that good, but we also very recently featured it on our scariest horror movie endings list, and you know that I like to keep things fresh, so consider this today's most honourable of honourable mentions. Well, we've managed to make it all the way to a part 3 for this list, so it's safe to say that there's quite a few forgotten horror classics lurking beneath the floorboard, so let's take a look, shall we? Kicking off at number 5, Horror Express, 1972. And yes, I know what you're thinking. In some cases, early 70s B-movie horror is a little too campy for everyone's taste, but if you're thinking about diving into some of the most well-crafted, long-forgotten classics of horror cinema, the 1972's Horror Express is the film for you. You see, whilst its cultural significance was by no means lost on the majority of die-hard horror fans, the real shame is if this film was produced and released perhaps under a more palatable manner, Horror Express would have received the true recognition it deserves. For a low-budget horror movie though, this film hits hard, and it's down to a pitch-perfect performance by the king of horror himself, the late, great Sir Christopher Lee, who plays a brilliantly convincing British anthropologist stuck on a train filled with frozen ancient aliens and subsequent zombies. Yeah, that's always a winning combination. Written by Arnaud Dosseau and directed by Eugenio Martin, Horror Express tells a tale of Professor Sir Alexander Saxton, played by Lee, who in the year 1906 is travelling on the legendary Trans-Siberian Express from China to Moscow, hauling a crate containing the frozen mummified remains of a strange primitive humanoid creature that was discovered in a cave in Manchuria. Yeah, there's obviously a lot of setup to it, but don't worry, because Christopher Lee carries this movie with more wry smirks and authoritative bassy dialogue than his own heavy metal Christmas album, as things quickly go terribly wrong on the most iconic of horror narrative locomotive devices. Come on, everyone loves a train murder mystery / zombie invasion, right? Horror Express is pure nostalgia, dripping with atmosphere and crammed with some of the greatest character actors in the history of cinema, pinned neatly behind a surprisingly innovative narrative for its time. The fact that it's sadly a bit too dusty for most people's horror collection is a shame, and reason enough for you to pick it up.
Coming in at number 4, Slaughter High, 1986.
What happened to Marty was an accident. It wasn't our fault.
Of course it was. And Marty knows it. I'm scared, Frank.
Directed by Mark Ezra and released in 1986, Slaughter High is a slasher that tells the story of a group of adults responsible for a prank gone wrong on April Fool's Day, who are invited to a reunion at their defunct high school where a masked killer awaits inside. And that masked killer is absolutely terrifying. Now, it's by no means a creative slasher, with it quite literally centering on a bunch of kids getting killed off one by one, but what redeems the movie are the kills, which are truly incredible. Hear me out. One guy gets duped into drinking acid, another is melted alive in a chemical bath, one gets his wrist slit and face whacked off by a tractor blade, and the others are barbecued alive on an electrified bed. Yeah. Crazy, right? It is perhaps one of the most nihilistic horror movies of the 80s, which says a lot. The movie makes no effort to goad the audience into cheering for the survivors. Instead, we're rooting for the moralist mass murderer, which is completely and utterly enjoyable. And to top it off, Harry Manfredini scored the movie, which might even be better than his work on Friday the 13th.
Coming in at number 3, I've said it once, I've said it again, Session 9 is one of the greatest films. Brad Anderson blessed the horror genre with a small tale of encroaching madness that is absolutely haunting to behold. This 2001 psychological horror stars David Caruso, Peter Mullen, and Josh Lucas, and follows an asbestos abatement crew who begin to experience growing tensions while working in an abandoned mental asylum. This is paralleled by the gradual revelation of a former patient's disturbed past through recorded audio tapes of her regression sessions. Now, it should be said that there is really not much that is inherently terrifying about this film. There are no real jump jump scares, no blood or gore, and the pace is slow and action low. That rhymed. However, this slow burn has a way of creeping up on you, as the boundaries of sanity are blurred within the confines of an abandoned mental asylum. As the horror begins to unfold, a Lovecraftian descent into madness sweeps through the asylum, affecting every single crew member as they turn on each other, vanish, and reappear in this truly creepy narrative. Session 9 received mixed reviews, with the film currently holding a 63 approval rating, which is incredibly undeserving. It should be way higher. Bloody Disgusting ranked the film 5th in its list of 20 best horror films of the 2000s, writing, "Session 9 isn't just a cheap hack and slash, instantly forgettable type horror film, but a psychologically probing, deeply unsettling journey off the edge and into the abyss of the human mind." Honestly, I can't stress enough how frightening this movie is, not to mention its chilling conclusion. Please check it out. Coming in at number 2, we have What We Do in the Shadows 2015. What We Do in the Shadows is a 2015 New Zealand mockumentary horror comedy film written and directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi, and the first installment in the What We Do in the Shadows franchise. The film's plot concerns several vampires who live together in a flat in Wellington. Now, modern spoofs that are genuinely good are pretty hard to come by, with most of them flopping and flopping hard. However, What We Do in the Shadows is a comedy and horror masterpiece. The movie itself is a docu-style story of idiotic vampires. What's better than that? Yes. I did say it was a modern spoof film, however it doesn't overtly reference any specific horror movies, but instead makes jokes of all the tropes and cliches in classic vampire horror movies. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 96%, with the general consensus reading, "Smarter, fresher and funnier than a modern vampire movie has any right to be. What We Do in the Shadows is bloody good fun." Ultimately, what makes What We Do in the Shadows so great is that it was made for us, horror fans, and it isn't pandering to anyone else, not to mention, it gets better and better the more times you watch it. Not to mention, Taika Waititi. It was essentially what gave him his big break. He's now doing Marvel, and he also did Jojo Rabbit, which, if you haven't seen Jojo Rabbit, I suggest you watch Jojo Rabbit. Should I say it one more time? Jojo Rabbit. And finally, coming in at number 1, The House on Sorority Row, 1983. Released back in '83, The House on Sorority Row follows 7 sorority sisters who throw a graduation party and play a prank that goes horribly wrong. They always do. Ending up with a dead body. They panic and try to hide it, but someone witnessed the crime and begins to murder them one by one in this cult classic. Now, this film often gets lost in the mix of other slasher movies, considering a few similar titles were released around the same time. The Dorm That Dripped Blood, The Sorority House Massacre, Don't Go in the House, etc. So it's easy to see why folks forgot about House on Sorority Row, which is a shame because this Mark Roseman movie is genuinely good and has some great gruesome gross out effects. In 2017, Complex named The House on Sorority Row the 21st best slasher film of all time, which is quite the feat. I quote, "The House on Sorority Row is fortunately more than just a puberty motivator for young boys. Director Mark Roseman does his best to stage prolonged moments of suspense, approaching the film's kill scenes with his Hitchcock influences intact. Scream 2 also makes references to the movie with references to 4 other college-themed slasher films, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, Splatter University, Graduation Day, and Final Exam. Although you may not be familiar with The House on Sorority Row, you may be familiar with the remake, which was released on September 11th, 2009, called Sorority Row and starred Rumer Willis and Carrie Fisher. Sadly, that film did not live up to its legacy and was a huge flop. Honestly, it was a waste of an hour and a half. Never again. Well, there we have it. Do you guys agree with our list? Were there any forgotten slasher movies that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below and perhaps we can do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos. Top 5 worst horror movie sequels, part 3. No one said Lucy's nostrils are hypnotic. That they are. I can do a lot with my nostrils. Damien said, please give a shout out. Love your bloopers, Lucy. Here's your shout out and thanks so much. I don't know if I have bloopers in this video, so sad times for you and only you. Sean McCarthy said, if I had to choose between Lucy and Freddy Krueger to haunt my nightmares, I'd choose Freddy. I'd rather be slashed to death than have the Dark Queen rip my soul in half. You're a very, very smart man, Sean. I'll remember these words when I'm in your nightmares tonight, as I am every night.
And on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later. And razor blade slashings. I just spat everywhere. One gay. Henry Manfredini. I said Henry. Harry Manfredini. To that I say, bah humbug. I was clearly in a really good mood when I read the script. Some of the things I wrote. This Lucy is a good Lucy. Honestly, it was a waste of an hour and a half. Who's texting me? That they are. I can do a lot with my nostrils. Editors, please zoom in on this. I could go for days.
The decade between 2000 and 2009 was a particularly fruitful era for the horror genre, with some of the greatest horror movies hitting the big screens and some flying under the radar. There is a ridiculous wealth of movies to mention from this particular decade, however, we only have 5 spots, so honorable mentions go out to The Children, Wolf Creek, Hostel, Frailty, Severance, and Suicide Club. Now, with that being said, let's jump into our list of the top 5 scary, forgotten horror movies from the 2000s. Before we begin though, be sure to stick around until the end of the video where I'll be responding to some of your comments. And with that, let's jump in. Coming in at number 5, we have House of the Devil. After his incredible fall from grace with Cabin Fever 2, which he went on to disown, Ty West became an instant genre director to watch following his 2009 masterpiece, House of the Devil, which starred Greta Gerwig. That's right, Greta Gerwig, aka the director of Little Women. This horror film concerns a young college student who is hired as a babysitter at an isolated house and is soon caught up in a bizarre and dangerous event as she fights for her life. The film combines elements of both the slasher film and haunted house subgenres while using the satanic panic of the 1980s as a central plot element. House of the Devil is a delightfully old-fashioned tale of Satanism that remains one of the best things to come out of the vintage-tinged horror throwback. Now, eager for a sum of cash that could turn her life around, our protagonist Sam ignores all the red flags along the way until it is far too late and House of the Devil delivers maximum impact. It's a slow burn, that's for sure, but simultaneously creepy and beautiful. The film received hugely positive reviews, with Rotten Tomatoes gifting it an 87% with the general consensus reading. Though its underlying themes are familiar, House of the Devil effectively sheds the loud and gory cliches of contemporary horror to deliver a tense, slow-building throwback to the fright flicks of decades past. The movie suffocates you with its smoldering atmospheric dread and shocking moments of blunt violence. It is a must-watch.
Coming in at number 4, we've got Black Christmas from 2006. Funnily enough, with all the Christmas decorations that pop up on November 1st, I was discussing Black Christmas with some friends the other day. Of course, the Bob Clark original is a bona fide classic and should be watched every December. But then I brought up the possibility of a Black Christmas marathon, 1974, 2006, and 2019, just for fun. To my surprise, the folks I was talking to didn't even know there was a 2006 remake, and really, this shouldn't have surprised me. It's a fascinating little case study. Plenty of actors who went on to be big in their own right, a trailer with a bunch of kills filmed without the director's knowledge, some additional backstory for the killer. It's a strange recipe, kinda like human flesh sugar cookies. But mostly, it works. This is by no means a bad movie, but it exists in a space where it's less good than the original and also has a more modern remake garnering a lot of attention. Plus, the mid-2000s were kind of rough when it came to horror. A lot of folks were paying attention to parodies and French extremist flicks, and that's about it. So when a remake of one of the most legendary slashers of all time popped up, it seemed to sort of just exist. But if you're looking for a Christmas movie that really dials up the festive fear, this is the one for you. I already mentioned the flesh cookies, so let's list off a few more holiday horrors you'll get to see while watching 2006's Black Christmas. We've got a wicked snowstorm leading to death by falling icicle. We've got the world's sharpest Christmas tree, and of course there are plenty of Christmas tunes to really set the mood. Plus, if you were just expecting Billy to make a return, think again. As the weather gets a little colder, consider dusting off this forgotten remake and take it for a spin. Before we get to number 3, if you guys are enjoying this video, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm. Thank you.
Next up at number 3, The People Under the Stairs, 1991.
Children misbehaving in the basement, and one in the wall, doing his business, God knows where.
And talking of performance, wowza, I'm not sure if I'll ever forget the terrifying sound of Mrs. Robertson screaming at Alice to get in the bathtub, but truth be told, we have covered this movie before, quite a while ago in fact. But considering it's our 10th episode, I think it's proper that we pull it back out of the vaults, or the strange crawl space between the walls, and give praise to one of Wes Craven's strangest and most overlooked of horror movies. You see, riding off the success of Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm not entirely sure whether people knew what to expect from this movie following its release 7 years later. I mean, between that you had 1988's The Serpent and the Rainbow and 1989's Shocker, so stylistically I'm sure audiences were expecting an amalgamation of the three. You see, it's not that at all. The People Under the Stairs was a flat-out curveball from Wes Craven, and this movie is so unashamedly weird that several of the taboo themes that it handles could have gone the complete other way with audiences. But you know what? They didn't. Strangely enough, at the time this movie was a surprise commercial success, and I think in that sense it affirms exactly why these forgotten movies are so important for us to rediscover now. Yes, granted, The People Under the Stairs is perhaps one of our more recognisable forgotten horror movies, and in that sense, please don't begrudge me if you've heard of it, you're not the only one. But hey, it's episode 10, and I'm trying to make a point here. Horror cinema has so many of these gems that deserve a second look in, and for new emerging audiences of horror, there is a lot to be learned in The People Under the Stairs. Surprisingly enough, this movie is a weird satire of late-stage capitalism, and as far as characterization goes, it proves the point that with two weird enough villains and two awesome actors to deliver it, you can make even the most nonsensical of plots turn into a worthy horror show. Really, Brandon Adams, Everett McGill, and AJ Langer are awesome in this movie, but Wendy Roby as Mrs. Robertson steals the show. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching this movie quite yet, give it a look. Swinging in at number 2, Dark City, 1998. And I'm in the mood to change things up a bit for this one, because for the most part, this entry isn't a horror movie in the traditional sense, and in some ways it isn't a horror movie at all. But I do believe that from a purely visual perspective, 1998's Dark City is a fantastically terrifying mishmash of all things that you top 5 scary viewers enjoy. Now, that's also not to say that this film doesn't hit the mark when it comes to narrative, because holy moly does this movie cover some weighty themes, and I won't say anything to give it away other than the fact that this film was perhaps a cultural precursor to The Matrix. Written and directed by Alex Proyas, the man responsible for the fantastic 1994 dark thriller The Crow starring Brandon Lee, Dark City is a film of such unfortunate timing that it's no wonder that it was forgotten to the sands of time. And for the most part, it's down to one film. Titanic, released a few months prior, that pretty much washed out any other movie's chance at the box office, particularly a neo-noir stylized gothic science fiction mystery. Yeah, Titanic wasn't the only cause of ships sinking in the late 90s, but that's fine because hindsight is our friend, and now we can truly pay our dues to how damn awesome Dark City truly is. And you'll also be pleased to know that this film is absolutely stacked when it comes to its cast. Kiefer Sutherland, Rufus Sewell, Jennifer Connelly, Richard O'Brien, William Hurt, and Ian Richardson, all of which give resounding performances throughout. I really don't want to give away any of the plot points, because the true joy of this film comes with discovering things as the Dark City slowly reveals them, but trust me, this film is awesome. If you were a fan of The Crow or anything that directors like Terry Gilliam have ever produced, then you'll adore Dark City. Give it a watch.
At number 1 we have The Witch, 2016. The Witch is a 2016 supernatural horror film written and directed by Robert Eggers in his feature directorial debut. The film stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Ralph Ineson, Kate Dickie, and Lucas Dawson. The plot follows a Puritan family who encounter forces of evil in the woods beyond their New England farm. The Witch is an incredibly effective movie that manages to make twin children and a billy goat some of the most terrifying villains of the movie. Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? The Witch relies on unsettling fear to instill dread, rather than relying on jump scares or overt scare tactics. The movie is a slow burn, however, from start to finish you're hooked and can't pull your eyes away from the screen. The film was a critical success, with it receiving an approval rating of 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading, as thought-provoking as it is visually compelling. The Witch delivers a deeply unsettling exercise in slow-building horror that suggests great things for debuting writer-director Robert Eggers. Between Anya Taylor-Joy's mesmerizing performance, my friend Daniels as the devil himself, shout out Daniel, and the ominous entity in the woods, I'm seeking out Black Phillip's book to sign right about now. Now it is safe to say that The Witch is a love it or hate it kind of movie, considering its pace and lack of overt scares. However, Leslie Coffin criticized A24 for this, saying that it was a huge mistake to market the movie as a terrifying horror, not because it doesn't fit into the genre of horror, but because of the power of expectations. The less you know about the movie, the better your experience will be, but everyone who saw it opening weekend probably walked in with too much knowledge and hype to really get as much out of it as they could have if the film had the veil of mystery. I honestly couldn't have said it better myself. First time I watched The Witch, I knew nothing at all about it, and I loved every single minute of it. But I also understand that a slow burn with not many jump scares isn't for everyone. Most people look for quick pace with horror, but The Witch will never offer that to you. But that's what makes it so effective. It's slow, it's eerie, there's not a lot of dialogue. That is what makes it so creepy. What exactly is in the woods? And why is this Billy Goat, Black Phillip, so terrifying? And, more importantly, why is he talking? And now, why is he a man? Well, there we have it. Do you guys agree with our list? Were there any forgotten horror movies that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below and perhaps we can do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos. Top 5 scariest Lovecraftian gods from cosmic horror. Black Cavalia said, stop waving your hands. I like to wave my hands. It means I'm very expressive and I'm passionate about what I'm saying. But I bet you're glad I'm doing voiceover right about now. If only you could see behind this microphone. I am waving my hands. Charlie Edwards said, not into horror in general, but I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft. More please. Well, hopefully we change your mind about horror in general, but we do have lots and lots and lots of Lovecraft videos for you to feast upon. I think we even have a playlist. Check it out. Cabal887 said, I love a video where Lucy talks about her fellow cosmic entities. They're not my fellow entities, they're my minions. Abnathan said, I'm actually impressed with how you pronounce the name, so you're sure you're not a witch? I'm not sure. I think we're all witches at the end of the day, but it did take me a long time to practice those Lovecraft pronunciations. Took me 2 years, to be honest. If only you knew how I originally pronounced Nyarlathotep. You have no idea. And on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later.
Got a good memory, but it's short. Shout out to my dad for that one. That's the thing about movies. Unless a flick is groundbreaking or outrageous or a blockbuster mega hit, they tend to be forgotten pretty quick. This can be both good and bad. Let's start with the bad news. Falling into obscurity means, well, the movie's obscure. Less people will watch it. It's remembered less. But this can make for some excellent hidden gem viewing. Rediscovering a movie that has disappeared from the public's memory at large is a blast and a half, to say the least. Especially if it's a lesser known horror sci-fi gem, because honestly, the more obscure a sci-fi horror is, the better it's likely to be. Big budget blockbusters need not apply. Y'all try too hard to explain everything and shoehorn expensive special effects in. If you made a movie for multi-millions and it faded into obscurity, it's probably for a good reason. Hello horror heads and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're gonna be counting down the top 5 scary forgotten sci-fi horror movies. So grab your clunky yet technologically advanced weaponry because this is gonna get messy. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more alienated aliens. Outrageous, let's get going. Coming in at number 5, we've got Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. Wes Craven did a Swamp Thing? 2 years before Nightmare? Huh, who knew? One hell of a flick, too. Of course, it follows the classic Swamp Man story, you know. There's a hunky scientist working on some sort of secret formula, but he gets accosted by a paramilitary force, accidentally uses the experimental stuff on himself, and turns into a beast. He's more hulky than hunky at this point. The version of this eponymous DC bog beast is just full of camp and goofy fun, and when you boil it down to the bare essentials, it is just a rubber monster movie, but it's done with such heart it's hard to ignore. Plus, it hits on 3 different levels. You got the monster movie, you got the mad scientist movie, and you got the transformation beat. There's something for everybody. Speaking of something for everybody, this movie also has lots of moods. At times, it can be peaceful and poetic, channeling the gentle soul of a certain Frankenstein's monster, while at other times, it can be a vicious and brutal gore fest. The balance it strikes between those two things is surprisingly, well, balanced. It helps that the titular Thing is relatively good-humored through all the nonsense, finding beauty in the swamp, claiming it only hurts when he laughs. It's a lovely departure from the grimdark tone some similar movies may try to hit. Oh, and Adrienne Barbeau's in it too. Hard to miss when casting her in classic horror, eh? If you're in the mood for something equally goofy and gory, take Swamp Thing for a spin. Plus, it's always interesting to watch pre-Nightmare Wes Craven flicks and see the similarities and differences.
Coming in at number 4, we have Attack the Block, 2011. Attack the Block is a 2011 British science fiction horror comedy film written and directed by Joe Cornish and starring John Boyega, Jodie Whittaker, and Nick Frost. The film centers on a teenage street gang who have to defend themselves from predatory alien invaders on a council estate in South London on Guy Fawkes Night. Attack the Block is an effective genre mashup that blends sci-fi and comedy with creature feature horror, with the movie offering up immense tension as well as tons of laughs and engaging social commentary. Attack the Block received critical acclaim from critics, with it receiving a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus reading, effortlessly mixing scares, laughs, and social commentary. Attack the Block is a thrilling, brisky-paced sci-fi yarn with a distinctly British flavour. Attack the Block is a movie that has something for everyone. It is also the place Star Wars star John Boyega got his start, making it a movie you should definitely take a look at. Attack the Block was revisited by critics following the casting of its 2 lead actors as stars of flagship science fiction franchises. As I mentioned, Boyega in Star Wars and Whittaker in Doctor Who. In a 2017 retrospective, Tom Phillips, writing for GQ, described the film as, I quote, "one of the most confidently delivered debut feature films in recent memory. It still stands out as one of the best genre mashup films of the decade. It is definitely worth your time."
Coming in at number 3, we've got Screamers. This is not just a banger of a tune by Sleepy Dog, it's also a paranoid, muddy, strip-mining nightmare based on a story by Philip K. Dick. We're dropped into a futuristic world in which a war is being fought between a mining company and a union. Not so unrealistic yet, hey? The new economic bloc has sent a bunch of grizzled dudes to mine a miraculous material that solves all of Earth's energy issues. However, this stuff is also mad deadly, and the miners are tired of literally perishing in the name of profit. So the Alliance, a fun name for the Union, designs some artificially intelligent self-replicating screaming robots called autonomous mobile swords. Hell yeah. So these insane robot things go around mucking NEB folks until they table some peace talks. Psych! The peace talks were a ruse, but not that it matters, because in a stunning twist of fate that nobody could have seen coming, the autonomous mobile swords have become the new common enemy. See, they started to replicate humans pretty effectively and started killing indiscriminately. So now the world of Screamers is an endlessly paranoid one. Anyone could be a screamer in disguise. You can't trust anybody. Not even the kid with the teddy bear on the dead planet. Especially not the kid with the teddy bear on the dead planet. Hell, don't even trust the teddy bear itself. Dark, mucky, desolate, desperate, this is a flick scary in scope that has plenty of spooky moments to boot. It's kind of like Blade Runner meets Alien, but also kind of less memorable than either one. But hey, this is a list about forgotten movies. I think we can forgive it for not living up to those 2 legendary flicks. Coming in number 2, we've got The Wizard of Gore from 2007. Who would have thought remaking Herschel Gordon Lewis films would one day be trendy? I suppose stranger things have happened. I'm sort of surprised that this one doesn't get talked about more, but what can you do? Maybe remakes of cult splatter oddities from the 60s and 70s just don't have the mass appeal you'd think they would. Even with Crispin Glover as Montage, it sort of misses the mark. Lots of fun though, with plenty of ooey gooey gore. The premise, for those unfamiliar with Montage the Magnificent, is that there is a traveling show featuring a mysterious magician. He brings beautiful women onto the stage and proceeds to eviscerate them in front of the audience. It's disturbing and all too real, but at the end of each show, the bloodied person is revealed to be actually fine. But then every volunteer ends up dead. Their death happens sometime after the end of the performance, but it always has something to do with the way they died on stage. Uh-oh. The movie doesn't follow Montage though. It focuses mostly on Edmund Bigelow, a weird journalist turned noir protagonist who finds it a little strange that Montage can perform live surgery. He starts digging and finds some stuff he can't explain. But is he going insane? Is the Wizard of Gore really murdering people? Can he carry this movie on his own? Satisfying answers to any of these questions are hard to find, which might have something to do with forgettability. But isn't it wild that there's an HGL remake from the last 2 decades? Apparently somebody remade Blood Feast in 2016 too. Who knew?
And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Symptoms, 1974.
Did you hear that? What? There it is again.
And for the number 1 entry of part 10 of this forgotten horror movie series, we have to highlight the literal definition of a forgotten horror movie. Really, following its completion and subsequent premiere at the 1974 Cannes Film Festival as the first ever official British entry, Symptoms pretty much disappeared several years later. You see, the original prints of this movie were missing for over 3 decades, with the last ever showing of this movie being on the BBC back in 1983. After that, poof, gone. Disappeared with no clue as to why, when, or who had them. For many years, bootlegs of Symptoms were circulated privately by collectors, but between 1983 and up until recently, this movie was effectively forgotten from the halls of horror cinema. And then, in February of 2016, the British Film Institute saved the day, and now, as well as being available on DVD for your own collection, is also available on YouTube right this minute. So please guys, check it out. Because Symptoms is a remarkable entry in horror cinema, and it stars one of the most underrated female actors in 1970s British horror, Angela Pleasance, who is indeed the daughter of Donald Pleasance, Dr. Samuel Loomis himself. Written and directed by exploitation horror aficionado Jose Larraz, Symptoms tells the tale of the reclusive Helen Ramsey, who invites her friend Anne to stay with her for the weekend at her family's estate. And by estate, I mean absolutely huge English manor covered by a dense impenetrable forest that hasn't seen a glimpse of the outside world for the past few centuries. Warning signs already, right? You see, Helen has been away for years, working as a translator abroad before returning to her family's native England, where she had spent her childhood alongside Anne before leaving. The point is, there may well be reason for that, and soon we realise that Helen is full of far more inconsistencies of a much more terrifying kind of manner. I'll say no more because in classic British exploitation horror kind of fashion, this movie relies on its twisting and turning narrative to keep us on our toes, but most importantly, visually speaking, this movie is the definition of visual dread. This movie is just creepy to watch. It fills you with a weird sense of dread, its lingering camera is unnerving, and the performances from both Angela Pleasance and Lorna Hellebrand are terrifyingly brilliant, with Peter Vaughan, who plays Brady, also being of note. You see, as far as forgotten horror cinema is concerned, Symptoms is perhaps the closest that we'll ever come to defining the term, and that's why it takes our number 1 spot for part 10 of this series. Look how far we've come. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 scariest forgotten horror movies, part 10. What do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree, or are you just impressed that we've made it this far? Let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as any choice picks of your own. And who knows, part 20? Yeah, now that would be something. Before we depart from today's video though, let's first take a quick look at some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. First up, DH says, eat bollocks, Jack. Cheers, pal. I needed that one. Next up, Gary Abbott says, here's a rundown of the excellent movies that have been covered so far, and then just manages to list literally every movie we've covered in this series. So my point is, thank you so much, Gary Abbott, for taking the time of listing each and every movie that we've covered in this series so far. Hopefully this part 10 will give you a neat little add-on for the complete list. I quite like even numbers, but 9 is a pretty good number as well. Whatever. Cheers, buddy. You're doing a grand job. And finally, the real Thanos says, Reality Stone looks good on you, Jack. Thanos. And cheers, buddy. It's working out well, actually. Just wasn't really feeling the Power Stone, you know? Heavy is the crown. Ooh, sorry, buddy. Too soon? Yeah. Anyway, on that alternate reality note, that's what we've got time for in today's video. I don't know what I'm talking about. Cheers for sticking around all the way until the end. If you're a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in particular, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Fiend. You'll be watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.